Growing up as the middle child in the Chin family meant I was constantly caught between my overachieving older sister Lisa and my academically gifted younger brother David. While Lisa excelled in business and David dominated in mathematics and science, I found my passion in art history and cultural studies. Unfortunately, my family viewed this as the soft option, something you did when you couldn't handle real subjects. Art doesn't pay the bills, Dad would say whenever I brought home another A+ in my art history courses. You need practical skills, not opinions about old paintings. Lisa was particularly dismissive of my interests. 5 years older and already climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious marketing firm, she never missed an opportunity to point out how impractical my studies were. "Maya's got her head in the clouds," she'd announce at family gatherings. "While I'm closing million-dollar deals, she's writing essays about dead painters." The comments stung, but I'd learned to let them roll off me. I knew my work had value even if my family couldn't see it. After graduating with a master's degree in art history and cultural preservation, I'd found a position that perfectly combined my academic background with practical applications. I worked for a federal cultural heritage protection program, helping to track stolen artwork, authenticate historical pieces, and investigate art fraud cases. The job was fascinating and important, but I kept the details vague when talking to my family. They knew I worked for the government in cultural something, but they assumed it was a boring desk job filing papers about museum acquisitions. I didn't bother correcting their assumptions. "At least it's stable government work," Mom would say consolingly. "Even if it's not very prestigious." Lisa would nod sympathetically. "Government jobs are perfect for people who don't want too much responsibility." What my family didn't understand was that my work involved serious criminal investigations. Art theft is a multi-billion-dollar international criminal enterprise, often connected to money laundering, terrorism funding, and organized crime networks. My expertise in authentication and provenance research made me valuable to federal law enforcement agencies tracking stolen cultural artifacts. The complexity of my actual work became clear during a case I'd been working on for 8 months. A network of stolen Renaissance paintings had surfaced in various auction houses across the country, all with falsified provenance documents. The FBI's art crime team had brought me in as a consultant to help trace the origins and identify the forgeries. The investigation led to a major breakthrough when we discovered that several legitimate collectors had unknowingly purchased stolen pieces. The artwork needed to be temporarily confiscated while we built our criminal case against the theft ring. This meant that some very expensive, very beautiful pieces needed secure storage while serving as evidence in an ongoing federal investigation. Since I had the highest security clearance on the team and expertise in art preservation, I was authorized to store several pieces in my home's climate-controlled basement. My house had been modified with museum-quality environmental controls, security systems, and fire suppression specifically for this purpose. The FBI covered all the costs for the modifications since the arrangement saved them thousands in professional storage fees. The pieces I was storing were extraordinarily valuable, not just financially but historically. A small Picasso sketch worth $45,000, a Renaissance-era illuminated manuscript valued at $35,000, and a collection of Asian antiquities worth approximately $40,000. All were stolen goods being held as evidence while we pursued the criminal network that had trafficked them. I loved having the pieces in my house, even temporarily. Every morning, I'd spend a few minutes in the basement just appreciating the craftsmanship and historical significance of what I was protecting. It felt like being a guardian of cultural heritage, which was exactly why I'd gotten into this field. My family, however, saw my collection very differently during their occasional visits. "Maya's weird art phase is getting expensive," Lisa would comment, glancing at the pieces without really seeing them. "How much did you spend on all this old stuff?" "They're not purchases," I'd explain. "They're part of my work." "Work?" Dad would laugh. "You mean the government pays you to collect art?" I tried to explain that the pieces were evidence in federal investigations, but my family interpreted this as me trying to make my hobby sound more important than it was. "She probably bought them at estate sales and made up stories about their significance," Lisa whispered to Mom during one visit, not quite quietly enough. The dismissive comments continued for months. Every family gathering included some reference to my expensive taste or impractical spending habits. Lisa particularly enjoyed making jokes about my investment in old paintings nobody cares about. Normal people put money in retirement accounts, she'd announce. Maya puts money in dusty artwork. The situation reached a breaking point last spring when I was called away on an urgent assignment to authenticate a collection of potentially stolen artifacts in Miami. The case was time-sensitive and required my immediate presence for 2 weeks. Since the artwork in my basement was secure and monitored by federal surveillance systems, I didn't worry about leaving it unattended. What I didn't anticipate was my family's reaction to my absence. 3 days into my Miami assignment, I received a text from Lisa. Stopped by to check on your house. Everything looks fine, but seriously, Maya, the amount of money you've wasted on that basement gallery is concerning. I texted back, please don't go in the basement. The security system is very sensitive. Relax. I'm not going to steal your precious art collection. The next text came 2 days later. Had an appraiser look at your pieces. You might have better taste than I thought. Some of this stuff is actually valuable. My blood went cold. Lisa, you brought an appraiser to my house? Without asking. I was worried you'd gotten scammed by art dealers. Turns out some pieces are worth serious money. The appraiser thinks you could get $120,000 for the whole collection. I immediately called her. Lisa, you cannot sell my collection. Those pieces are not for sale. Maya, we need to talk about this practically. You're sitting on $120,000 worth of art while complaining about student loan payments. It's irresponsible not to monetize assets. Those pieces are not assets. They're evidence in federal investigations. Lisa laughed. Come on, Maya. Stop trying to make your art hobby sound like police work. You bought expensive art you can't afford and now you're embarrassed about it. I'm serious, Lisa. Do not touch anything in my basement. I'm trying to help you make a smart financial decision for once in your life. The conversation ended with Lisa promising not to do anything dramatic, but I could hear the wheels turning in her mind. Lisa had always been convinced that I was financially irresponsible, and now she thought she'd discovered proof that I'd been lying about my income and spending habits. I tried to focus on my work in Miami, but I was distracted by worry about what Lisa might do. I considered flying back early, but the authentication work was critical to a major federal case. I decided to trust that Lisa wouldn't actually sell anything without talking to me first. I was wrong. The call came on Friday morning, just as I was finishing my final authentication report. Maya. The voice was unfamiliar and panicked. Yes, who is this? This is Robert Hartman from Hartman Fine Art Gallery. I purchased a collection from your sister yesterday, and we have a serious problem. My stomach dropped. What kind of problem? FBI agents are in my gallery right now, confiscating everything I bought from Lisa Chin. They're saying the pieces are stolen goods and evidence in a federal investigation. They want to know how I obtained federal evidence. I closed my eyes. Mr. Hartman, I work for the FBI's Cultural Heritage Protection Program. Those pieces were evidence in an ongoing federal investigation, stored at my residence under official authorization. Your sister said they were your personal collection and you needed money for student loans. My sister committed theft of federal evidence. She had no right to sell those pieces. But I paid $120,000. I have a bill of sale signed by Lisa Chin. Mr. Hartman, I'm very sorry, but you've been defrauded. Those pieces were never for sale and my sister had no legal authority to sell them. I could hear shouting in the background of Hartman's call. The FBI agents want to speak with you immediately, he said. They're asking if you were complicit in selling federal evidence. Tell them I'm Agent Maya Chin, badge number 4471, and I've been in Miami on official assignment. I had no knowledge of this sale. I hung up and immediately called my supervisor in D.C. Agent Chin. Director Williams answered on the first ring. We've got a situation at your residence. Sir. My sister sold the evidence pieces while I was in Miami. Your sister committed theft of federal evidence, fraud, and obstruction of a federal investigation. We need you back in D.C. immediately. The flight home was a nightmare. I spent 3 hours trying to understand how Lisa could have done something so catastrophically stupid. She'd somehow convinced herself that I was lying about my job, my income, and the nature of my art collection. In her mind, she was helping me make a smart financial decision by liquidating what she thought were my personal assets. But what Lisa didn't realize was that she'd committed multiple federal felonies. Theft of federal evidence, fraud, obstruction of justice, and interfering with a criminal investigation. The pieces she'd sold weren't just valuable artwork. They were crucial evidence in a case against an international art theft ring. I landed in D.C. and drove straight to the FBI field office, where Director Williams and 2 agents from the art crime team were waiting. "Agent Chin," Williams said grimly, "we need to know everything about how your sister gained access to the evidence." I explained the security system, Lisa's visits to check on the house, and her conviction that I was financially irresponsible. "She genuinely believed she was helping me," I said. "She thought I'd wasted money on expensive art and needed to liquidize assets to pay bills." "Agent Chin, your sister's intentions are irrelevant. She committed theft of federal evidence. The pieces she sold were critical to building our case against a criminal network that's stolen millions in cultural artifacts." "What's the damage to the investigation?" "Substantial. The buyer, Hartman, claims he purchased in good faith, but now the chain of custody for our evidence is compromised. Defense attorneys will argue that the evidence was contaminated. Your sister may have inadvertently helped the criminals we've been pursuing for months." I felt sick. What happens to Lisa? She'll be arrested and charged with multiple federal crimes. Theft of federal evidence carries up to 10 years in prison. The agents explained that they'd already traced the entire transaction. Lisa had contacted Robert Hartman, describing herself as my financial advisor, who was helping me liquidate assets. She'd forged my signature on bills of sale and presented herself as acting with my authority. Hartman had paid $120,000 for what he thought was a legitimate private collection. "Where's the money?" I asked. "Your sister deposited it in what she thought was your bank account. She apparently believed she was doing you a favor by forcing you to sell what she considered impractical investments." That evening, I drove to my parents' house for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. The family was gathered for dinner, and Lisa was clearly the star of the evening. "There she is," Dad called out as I walked in. "Lisa told us about your big art sale. $120,000. We had no idea you were sitting on such valuable pieces." Mom hugged me. "We're so proud that you finally made a practical financial decision. Lisa said the money will help with your student loans." I looked around the table at my family's happy faces. They had no idea that Lisa had just destroyed her life by committing federal crimes. "Your weird art sold for $120,000. Lisa announced dramatically, clearly having practiced this moment. The family burst into celebration. "Finally useful for something." Mom cheered, raising her glass. Everyone was applauding and congratulating Lisa for her financial advice. I smiled and said nothing, trying to figure out how to explain what had actually happened. "Congratulations," I said quietly. Lisa was beaming with pride. "I know you're probably mad that I went behind your back, but Maya, you needed someone to make the hard financial decisions. You were sitting on a fortune while complaining about money. Tell me exactly how you sold the pieces," I said. "I found this gallery owner, Robert Hartman, who specializes in high-end art. He was very professional, did proper authentications, paid fair market value. The whole transaction was completely legitimate." "And you signed the bills of sale?" "I signed as your representative. I explained that you were out of town but had authorized the sale. Hartman was fine with it once I showed him my ID and explained our family relationship." My phone started ringing. Unknown number. "Hello. Is this Maya Chin?" The voice was panicked, almost screaming. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Robert Hartman from Hartman Fine Art Gallery. FBI agents are confiscating everything I bought from your sister." I walked into the kitchen for privacy. "Mr. Hartman, I need you to stay calm and cooperate fully with the agents. They're saying the pieces were stolen goods. They're saying I purchased federal evidence. How is that possible?" I could hear the celebration continuing in the dining room, completely oblivious to the disaster unfolding. "Mr. Hartman, those pieces were evidence in an FBI investigation. My sister had no authority to sell them. You were defrauded." "But she signed bills of sale. She said she was your financial representative." "My sister committed theft of federal evidence and fraud. I'm an FBI agent, and those pieces were evidence stored at my residence under official authorization." There was silence on the other end, then the sound of papers rustling frantically. Oh God, Hartman whispered. The agents are asking about obstruction of justice and trafficking in stolen goods. They want to know if I knew the pieces were evidence. Cooperate fully and tell them exactly what Lisa told you. You were a victim of fraud. I hung up and walked back to the dining room where Lisa was still holding court. Who was that? Dad asked. The gallery owner, I said calmly. Lisa perked up with interest. Everything okay? He seemed really professional when I worked with him. Lisa, I need you to understand something very important. Those pieces you sold weren't my personal collection. They were evidence in a federal FBI investigation, stored at my house under official authorization. The room went quiet. Lisa laughed nervously. Come on, Maya. Don't be dramatic. I know you work for the government doing something with art, but you make it sound like you're some kind of federal agent. I pulled out my badge and ID. I am Agent Maya Chin, badge number 4471, FBI Cultural Heritage Protection Program. The pieces you sold were evidence in an active federal investigation into international art theft. The color drained from Lisa's face. That's impossible. You work in some boring government office. I work for the FBI's art crime team. Those pieces were stolen artwork being held as evidence while we build a criminal case against the theft network. Dad was staring at my badge. Maya, are you really an FBI agent? Yes. And Lisa just committed theft of federal evidence, fraud, obstruction of justice, and interference with a criminal investigation. Lisa stood up suddenly. This is insane. I was trying to help you. You never told me you were an FBI agent. I told you repeatedly not to touch the pieces in my basement. I told you they were evidence in federal investigations. I thought you were making that up to sound important. Lisa, why would I make up being an FBI agent? Because you always felt inferior about your career compared to mine, she said weakly. The room was completely silent now. My parents were looking back and forth between Lisa and me, trying to understand how their successful older daughter had somehow committed federal crimes against their federal agent younger daughter. My phone rang again. Director Williams. Agent Chin, we need your sister to turn herself in for processing. Federal arrest warrants have been issued. She's here with my family right now. Can you bring her in, or do we need to send agents to the location? I looked at Lisa, who was starting to understand the magnitude of what she'd done. I'll bring her in, I said. After I hung up, I sat down across from Lisa. You need to come with me to the FBI field office. You're being charged with multiple federal felonies. Felonies? Mom gasped. Theft of federal evidence, fraud, forgery, and obstruction of a federal investigation. Each charge carries up to 10 years in prison. Lisa was crying now. I didn't know. I thought I was helping you. Lisa, you forged my signature and sold $120,000 worth of federal evidence. The fact that you thought you were helping doesn't change the crimes you committed. But you never told me you were an FBI agent. You never asked what I actually did. You just assumed I had some meaningless government job because that fit your image of me as the unsuccessful sister. Dad was staring at his hands. Maya, we had no idea about your real job. I tried to tell you the work was important, but you never took it seriously. We failed you, Mom said quietly. We treated your career like it was nothing when you were doing crucial law enforcement work. The immediate problem is Lisa's situation, I said. She needs a criminal defense attorney immediately. Federal prosecutors don't offer plea deals for theft of evidence. Lisa looked around the table desperately. Can't you just tell them it was a misunderstanding? That I didn't know. Lisa, you committed multiple federal felonies. My testimony would actually make your case worse because I can confirm that you had no authority to sell those pieces. But I'm your sister. Which makes this worse, not better. You violated my trust, compromised a federal investigation, and committed serious crimes. The drive to the FBI field office was silent. Lisa stared out the window, occasionally asking questions I couldn't answer about prison sentences and criminal records. How long have you been an FBI agent? She finally asked. 6 years. 6 years. You've been a federal agent for 6 years and I never knew. You never asked what I actually did. You just made assumptions and dismissed my work as unimportant. I thought you filed paperwork about museum donations. I investigate international art theft, authenticate stolen cultural artifacts, and build federal cases against criminal networks. Lisa was quiet for several blocks. The pieces I sold. How important were they to your case? Critical. They were key evidence in a case against a theft ring that's stolen millions in artwork. Your sale compromised months of investigation. I've destroyed everything. You've made the case much harder to prosecute. Defense lawyers will argue that the evidence was contaminated. At the FBI building, Lisa was processed and formally charged. She was released on bond but faced federal trial within 6 months. The charges were serious: theft of government property, wire fraud, forgery, and obstruction of justice. Robert Hartman, the gallery owner, was cleared of criminal charges but lost his $120,000. The Federal Victim Recovery Program would eventually reimburse him, but his reputation in the art world was damaged. Several clients canceled contracts because of the association with federal evidence trafficking. The stolen art pieces were recovered and returned to evidence storage, but the chain of custody issues created problems for our prosecution. The defense team argued that FBI evidence had been contaminated by family interference, and while we eventually won the case, the sentences were reduced due to procedural questions. Lisa's trial was brief. She pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. She received 3 years in federal prison and 5 years of supervised probation. Her marketing career was over, and her federal conviction made future employment extremely difficult. During her sentencing hearing, Lisa finally acknowledged what she'd actually done. I convinced myself that my sister was financially irresponsible because I couldn't accept that she had a more important career than mine, she told the judge. I committed federal crimes because I refused to believe my younger sister was an FBI agent. Your assumption doesn't excuse theft of federal evidence, the judge replied. Your crimes compromised a major investigation and could have helped dangerous criminals escape justice. The hardest part of the entire situation was watching my parents struggle to understand how their family dynamics had contributed to Lisa's crimes. They'd spent years treating my career as less important than Lisa's corporate success, never bothering to learn what I actually did. We created this, Dad said during one difficult conversation. We made Lisa feel like she was supposed to be the successful one, and we made you feel like your work didn't matter. You made assumptions, I said. But Lisa chose to commit crimes based on those assumptions. If we'd taken your career seriously, she would have known you were an FBI agent. Maybe. But Lisa chose to sell things that didn't belong to her without asking permission. That's the core criminal behavior. Lisa served her full sentence and was released on parole. She now works at a nonprofit organization helping other federal prisoners reintegrate into society. We have limited contact, but she's been genuinely remorseful about the damage she caused. During one supervised visit, she looked around my basement office, now restored with new evidence pieces from different cases. I still can't believe you're an FBI agent, she said quietly. You never asked what I actually did. You just assumed it was nothing important. I couldn't handle that my younger sister was more successful than me. Success isn't a competition, Lisa. We could have both been successful in different fields. I destroyed my career because I couldn't accept yours. The case became a training example in FBI protocols about evidence storage and family security risks. My supervisor now requires all agents storing evidence at home to undergo family background checks and security briefings for household members. But for me, it was a lesson about the danger of family members who refused to see you clearly. Lisa's crimes weren't really about money or art. They were about her inability to accept that her assumptions about me were completely wrong. She'd spent years convinced that I was the unsuccessful sister, and when evidence contradicted that belief, she chose to commit federal crimes rather than question her assumptions. The financial damage was $120,000. The investigative damage was months of compromised federal work. The family damage was a sister in federal prison. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones most invested in misunderstanding who you actually are. And sometimes, protecting yourself from that willful misunderstanding requires consequences that feel disproportionate to the underlying emotional crime. Lisa learned that lesson through federal prison. My parents learned it through watching their daughter get sentenced for crimes they'd never imagined possible. And I learned it through the surreal experience of having my competence validated by federal prosecutors instead of my own family. The artwork I protect now includes pieces recovered from Lisa's case. Every morning when I check on the evidence in my basement, I'm reminded that cultural heritage protection isn't just about preserving beautiful objects. It's about maintaining the integrity of systems that separate legitimate ownership from criminal theft. Lisa crossed that line because she couldn't accept who I really was. The art pieces were just the vehicle for a much deeper crime, refusing to see her sister clearly enough to avoid destroying both our lives.